We sit here and then we don't go up to the end to the sit down chairs.
Okay. Streaming online
We'll follow you.
to the campus conversation, which is our second of this semester. I'm Susan Poser, the Provost at UIC. The goal of the campus conversation series is to have faculty, students, and staff engage with each other about some of the big issues of our time going on now and affecting all of us. As a community dedicated to social justice and diversity, we come together to try to understand current events and talk about the issues. Over the past 3 years, we have looked at issues such as immigration, civil rights, national and local elections, and the hashtag #MeToo movement. This academic year, we've looked at food insecurity, general education, and free speech on campus. We will close this series for the year next month with a panel about Mayor Lightfoot's first year in office. Today, the topic is the 2020 Illinois Census, and particularly the role that UIC is playing in this process. We have 4 experts in this field who will share their insights on the topic. 2 representatives from the Illinois Department of Human Services will begin with an overview of the census, and I want to do a special shout out and thank you for the t-shirt, which I will wear with pride. And then we'll have UIC faculty members, Kathleen Yang-Clayton and Moira Zellner. They will share more about UIC's role and campus engagement. All of the presentations will take around 45 minutes, after which we will have 30 minutes for audience Q&A. On your chairs, there's a pencil and paper to write down your questions. Please write them down, and as we get closer to Q&A, they will be collected, and then we will provide them to the panel. So now it's my pleasure. I'm going to introduce the whole panel at once, even though they will come up in, I think, in pairs. Our first 2 presenters are Oswaldo Alvarez, who is the statewide census co-director of the 2020 Census Office for the state of Illinois. Oswaldo received his MA in Public Administration, Social Policy, and Social Service Professions from the University of Chicago. Oswaldo has a demonstrated professional history in the nonprofit organization management industry. Most recently, he served as program officer at the Grand Victoria Foundation. Marishonta Wilkerson is the statewide census co-director of the 2020 Census Office for the state of Illinois. Previously, Marishonta served as assistant counsel to the Speaker for the Illinois House of Representatives. Marishonta received her law degree from Northern Illinois University College of Law. Dr. Kathleen Yang-Clayton is clinical assistant professor in the Department of Public Administration, College of Urban Planning, and Public Affairs at UIC. She's co-principal investigator of the Illinois Department of Human Services UIC Census 2020 program. Dr. Yang-Clayton's cross-movement work on voting rights resulted in the passage of landmark legislation in Illinois that expanded access to underserved communities through same-day registration. I'm doing extremely short bios today. Dr. Yang-Clayton received her PhD in sociology from the University of Chicago. She also holds an MS in natural resource and agricultural economics from the University of Arizona. Finally, Dr. Moira Zellner is associate professor in the Department of Urban Planning and Policy and co-principal investigator of the Illinois Department of Human Services UIC Census 2020 program. Dr. Zellner has served as primary investigator and co-investigator for multidisciplinary projects studying how specific policy, technological, and behavioral changes can effectively address a range of complex social and environmental problems where interaction effects make responsibilities and burdens unclear. Dr. Zellner received her PhD in urban and regional planning and complex systems at the University of Michigan, from which she also has a master's in urban planning. So I would now like to invite Mr. Alvarez and Ms. Wilkerson to the platform to begin this conversation. Thank you.
Okay.
Do we clap? I don't know. You doing the first part?
However, or maybe I can. You want me to go first?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. I'm Oswaldo Alvarez, and
Marishonta Wilkerson.
so we usually split our presentation in 2. So I am going to go first, and then after my section, and I will turn it over to my colleague Marishonta. So the 2020 census. I guess we like to start by by talking to all of you, talking to all of the community members on why is the census important. The census is it happens every 10 years, as many of you I'm sure know, and the census has really three big components of what it does. One, it determines political representation across the U.S. Two, it guides resources across the entire U.S. And then three, it is a mechanism of statistics that allows for job creations, for road creations, for all of these different things across the U.S. One of the things that I usually like to share with people is that the census is actually the sixth sentence of the U.S. Constitution. So you know that document that starts with "We the people," and freedom of speech was an amendment that was not part of the original U.S. Constitution.
That's right. Yes.
So the reason I like to point this out is because of the power of what the census does. It draws the maps. It draws the resources. If you get counted, you exist. So what does this mean for Illinois? Illinois, since the 1930s, Illinois has been losing a congressional seat since the 1930s. After every census, we have been losing one seat after each decennial. This census, actually, we already are most likely going to lose one more congressional seat. If we have an undercount, we do have the threat of losing 2 congressional seats this year, this census. One of the things that people don't know is that, and we'll get a little bit more into why the undercount, right? But one of the things that we know is that Illinois as a state has been losing population. The city of Chicago has been losing population. The Midwest is losing population. However, we also know that there are pockets that are growing, and they are growing with the same pockets of individuals who are very afraid to have to do anything with government. So because of that, we have our work ahead we have a lot of work ahead, and because we want to make sure, again, that our communities have their representation and the resources. Another thing that it does, what does this mean for Illinois? Illinois receives each year $34 billion just on census data. So these are not competitive grants. These are not RFPs. This is no grant writer writing anything behind whatever because there's a new opportunity. This is just census data, dollars that come to the state of Illinois, just because of how many people are residents in the state of Illinois. So this is just to give you a perspective of what this means for our state, what this means for our city. We live in Chicago, right? We live in a global hub, right? What does this mean to be a global hub? What does it mean for the roads? What does it mean for the airport? What does it mean for the schools? So these are the things just for people to know. And this is just, for example, just to give you examples of, this is just like a very, very brief snapshot of like dollars that come to the state just on census data. So as you can see, from Pell Grant, we try to tailor it because we're here at UIC. The education ones, and then of course there's other ones. Again, there's so many that, but anyway. And here I'll turn it over to my colleague Marishonta.
Okay, and so this office got created by the executive order from our governor, and we have $29 million that was appropriated from the General Assembly for census outreach and education. And so this is the biggest per capita investment in census in the country, so we're very proud of that. We have given out grants and will continue to give out grants to community-based organizations to provide the outreach and education, particularly in the hard-to-count communities. And we like to mention this quote from our governor that says, "This is an aggressive effort because that is what the work ahead requires." And so these are some examples of hard-to-count populations. And so that is for the areas that had a very low census response rate in 2010. And so children under 5, people who are experiencing homelessness, college students, opportunity youth, renters, and communities of color are some examples. And so through our program, we have divided the state into 12 regions. We have a hub and spoke model. The groups that received our grants are called regional intermediaries. They're like coalition leaders, and they have selected over 360 nonprofits as subrecipients to actually do the work in the community. They're trusted messengers. And so this is just a map of our 12 regions. And these are a list of our grantees, the regional intermediaries, all over the state. and this is Chicago. So we have 9 in Chicago. Some you may have heard before, some are new, but they all have been doing a lot of work. And then this is our Chicago map of the 9 RIs, and so very clear geographic and HTC assignments. And so you'll see an asterisk for YWCA. They've been assigned to provide outreach and education for people experiencing homelessness in Chicago, as well as the LGBTQ community, and Illinois Action for Children to reach the children 0 to 5 throughout the whole entire city. And so I know there were some questions about how do college students or residents get counted. And so there's 2 ways, and I spoke to the U.S. Census Bureau regional manager before we got over here. I'm like, what is going on with UIC, in case anybody asks me. And so there's 2 ways that students can get counted in college living. And so the U.S. Census Bureau can drop off questionnaires, and they've already made contact with most universities, and the students, residents can complete them, or the school administrator can collect the information and provide that to the U.S. Census Bureau electronically. And I believe here it's a little combination of both. We provided the group quarter specialist information in case anyone would like to reach out to ask any particular questions about UIC.
Okay, I'm back. And so one of the things, and so of course this is a census timeline, just for everyone to be aware. In just 9 days, is it?
Yep.
Is this today the 3rd? Everyone here will be receiving a letter from the U.S. Census Bureau welcoming you to the 2020 census and inviting you to go online and fill out the census. One of the things that I try to tell people is that this is the first time that the census is going to be primarily online. So there's a big push for people to fill it out online. Just because let me get back to why this. Well, I'll let you know why is that very important in immigrant communities. After the what's it called, the online response rate, if you still have not responded by the middle of April, people will receive a paper questionnaire. So then you'll be able to fill it out. The census is 9 questions. One thing that I try to tell people is that the first 2 questions are already pre-populated because you already shared your information with the U.S. Postal Office, your name and your address. And the other 7 questions is race, ethnicity, do you own children, what have you. And if you still have not filled out the census by the end of April, then the door knocking begins in May. Every door that has not responded will receive up to 7 door knocks. If by the 7th door knock you still have not answered the door to fill out the census, then the door knocking is going to go into your neighbor's doors to try to see, hey, what's going on in that apartment. One thing that I do want to tell people is that as we go and work with immigrant communities, we tell people, we have been in the immigrant advocacy community, we have been telling people, know your rights, don't open the door. If someone is, make sure IDs, what have you. Now with the census, we're trying to tell people, hey, can you please open the door, right? We need your census, right? Yeah. So one of the things that we are telling people, and we're trying to advocate to communities throughout, is that please fill out the census online. If you fill out the census online, there is no reason why anyone should be knocking on your door. Avoid that door knock, and if for any reason someone comes in and knocks on your door, and you feel uncomfortable opening that door, please visit one of our community-based nonprofits that we're funding. There, you'll be able to fill it out. Or again, if you're using WhatsApp or Facebook or what have you, that means you have a smartphone. Fill it out online. Another thing, so one of the things that we did at the state, we are trying to build. This is the first time that there is a census office in the state of Illinois. So we are trying to do grassroots efforts while building a data-driven approach that allows for people to actually, for us to have like a systemic kind of approach across the state. Which means that we're trying to build the resources for our nonprofits and our community-based groups to be able to refer people or know how to navigate their work plans. So we rolled out this text messaging tool. So if you have a phone, you can text any kind of question related to the census to 987-987. And this text messaging tool will, again, it is for any questions regarding jobs, regarding the census, for you to do a pledge. And the other big piece of what this will bring to us is that it'll at the end, once the census is over, it'll give us a tool, a data base set that will allow us to know what kinds of questions are Illinoisans that care about, and probably the U.S. Census Bureau doesn't have a real straightforward answer. So for example, let's suppose that in the state of, now we'll be able to have in the state of Illinois, for example, let's say X amount of people care about filling out the census and they identify as gender non-binary. Now we'll be able to have a data set that says this is how many people were asking that question as they were trying to fill out the census. And the other tool that we rolled out is in our partnership with UIC, which is mapthecount.org, which I know I am not going to steal no thunder, so my next slide doesn't say anything.
Yes.
But it is a tool for our organizations to be able to map their efforts.
And that's our contact information. I think we're holding questions to the end, so that is it for us.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Yay. All right, I'll kick us off, and then when we transition,
Sorry, I got you.
unless you want to stand.
You're too chatty.
Cool. Thank you. All right. Okay, all right, so I'm using my loud lecture voice, sorry guys. So my name's Kathleen Yang-Clayton. I am faculty here at the College of Urban Planning and Public Affairs. I jotted down a couple of notes just to, first I just want to give a shout out to Shanta and Osvaldo. They focused a lot on the content, but they have been traveling the entire state. And they go to so many of these types of community meetings. When I reached out to them and I was like, we're a community too, UIC, and they're like, of course. And I'd originally just asked for one of the two of them, but because we all are loving each other, I'm so grateful and glad you guys are both here, so thank you.
Thank you.
I also wanted to emphasize one thing that doesn't appear really in here, and I'm just gonna start scrolling through. So first of all, big shout out to Dr. Janet Smith. She couldn't make it today. She's giving a keynote somewhere on the West Coast, so she couldn't make it. But the thing I wanted to point out is the names under our faces. So this project has brought in a lot of resources that we are now using to hire postdocs, researchers, Census Ambassadors to the tune of close to 25 individuals from our community, right, to leverage their human capital and their training and their passion to do this work. And so we're really grateful that we had this opportunity, we're having this opportunity to do this. So I'm going to give the sort of overview, and I'm going to try to run through it pretty quickly. I don't know when we actually started, so tell me to slow down or just throw something at me if you have a question. So technical assistance. So there's two components to the technical assistance work that we're doing. So we are on weekly webinars right now with all of those RIs. So you know that scroll down with all the organizations, the subs, all these municipalities that need real deep technical assistance support because they might never have actually run a comms plan around getting a message out around the census. So we develop on-demand, on-site trainings as well. And then, you know, of course, we're always answering the phone or emails and sending stuff. We've had these network convenings over at DPI, Discovery Partners Institute, statewide convenings where all 21, so there's 21 regional intermediaries, there's 31 contracts, so sometimes you'll hear both numbers. So we convene with them every 2 months to really like workshop and give them the information, the support that they need as a group. I and a couple of other of our staff are actually headed down to Springfield to work with our partners downstate because they always have to come up to Chicago. There's a lot of them down there, so we're doing regional convenings as well. So let me give you a couple of examples of the resources, and you guys are welcome. You can just Google this. Just Google UIC DPA Census 2020. And it'll pop you onto a website, and if you scroll down, sorry, I couldn't get my scrolling thing to show up, but there's a bunch of resources. We actually developed this for our RIs and subs, but you guys are welcome to take a look at it, right? So if you have questions about, you know, LGBTQ Task Force Explainer, right? If you're wondering, like, how do I convince my community that this is really important, there's a whole bunch of curated, and what we mean by curated is you're going to see a lot of toolkits out there and a lot of lists of stuff. Somebody who's trained laid eyeballs, clicked through, and actually said, this is good content. This is what you should be using. So we've got that. These subs and all these organizations that are working on the census in Illinois are doing 3 key things, and so there's a lot of detail work. They're doing community education, so there are tons of workshops in language, radio, TV, and newspaper ads, posters, billboards, transit posters. I mean, it's detailed. Then they're doing direct engagement. I understand that the handshaking is no longer a thing right now, so I mean, like maybe high-fiving. Right, but they're flyering outside of popular sites in their communities, supermarkets, bodegas, wherever. They're also going to be door knocking and phone banking. So there's 2 separate phases, right? Right now, there are no door knockers going out from the census. So what our trusted community partners are doing is they're already out there either trying to register voters for the upcoming primary or for the general elections. They're out there doing canvassing around public health issues in their communities. So they've added the census as a part of the messaging that they're giving out. Then finally, questionnaire assistance. So I think what Shanta and Oswaldo were saying, that if they don't have access to Wi-Fi, which unfortunately access to Wi-Fi pretty much maps on to poverty areas in the city, then they have Wi-Fi enabled portable tablets, and they are reaching out to people to invite them to libraries and all that stuff, as well as just to give direct support. Okay, so what's happening, and this is the slide that I believe that Janet would present, campus engagement at UIC and across the state. So if you go to the Natalie P. Voorhees Center for Neighborhood and Community Development, I just took a screenshot. So what the team there did was they took a slideshow that I'm going to share with you guys, and they customized it for each of the 9 universities I think that we were supposed to work with. But I want you guys to look at this, especially those of you who teach classes or are in front of students. If you click through, right, and you go to the University of Illinois at Chicago, it takes you to an open box system. And the reason why I'm pointing this out is that you can actually, if you scroll down and you look at Census 2020 presentation, UIC PowerPoint, there's another version of this, I couldn't get everything in one, where that's a slideshow that has very clear slides, there's facilitator notes. We have a version in this box that has a voiceover, so you don't even have to talk, you just have to turn it on and just let it go. But what we're trying to ask faculty and staff, and even students, and I'll talk about Census Ambassadors in a second, is to actually just don't wait for someone to ask you, hey, should you do a census present? Just do it, right? Like there's no like green light, yellow light. Like if you belong to a Gurdwara or a temple, or you have a community center that you're actively engaged, just grab what you need and do a presentation. Right? Like we're in the 11th hour right now, so the faster we can get this done, the better. You can also go to census2020.uic.edu, and there's a website that includes more census FAQs. We're just trying to get this out into multiple channels. Let me talk about Census Ambassadors. So, oops, sorry, this is also supposed to slide in. Do we have any of our Census Ambassadors here? Oh, okay, so Shreyas, stand up, say hi. So Shreyas is actually our first Census Ambassador. We have 9 others now on top of him. We're trying to recruit another 5. But basically, he is our Asian American Resource and Cultural Center. Like, you're specifically tagged there, but we do a lot of intersectional collaboration and stuff like that. And he runs workshops at the center. He will go to classrooms. He's working with Greek organizations too, right?
Yes, Greek organizations and mainly just outside organizations right now.
Okay, so I mean, so it's both inside and outside. So we're tapping into the diversity that's already present at UIC. Thank you, Shaz. And some of the quotes that we're getting from our Census Ambassadors, just want to say, just want to quote them. Growing up in a predominantly Hispanic immigrant neighborhood, I look at myself as a product of my own environment. And as such, promoting civic engagement and achieving social justice are 2 of my greatest passions. The second, I too identify with many of the undercounted populations in the city and want to do all that I can to ensure that everyone is counted, because everyone counts. So we've got really passionate, earnest students who are hitting the pavement. And so if you see them flyering outside of the library or whatever, spread the word. It's really encouraging for them to see people showing up and actually saying that they care as well. If you're interested in volunteering and you're a student in the office, take down that email, right? Use your little sheet of paper, right? Reach out. His name is Austin. Of course, Austin didn't write his name. It's Austin. Just like randomly email him. But he is extremely responsive. He's looking for students who can maybe only volunteer once or twice, right? Like you don't have to commit to the 10 hours a week that Census Ambassadors, so just get connected. We'll figure it out. Finally, I think this is my second to last slide. So we also have developed a box system. It's a secure cloud-based upload system that's capturing census activities in real time. So those sort of coalition leaders, the 21 or big organizations like the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, the Illinois Action for Children, Western Illinois Regional Council, love them, small but mighty. They're using this system, and basically they're given a link to go into the system. So you can see Champaign-Urbana Public Health District, and they click into it, and they start uploading what we call artifacts. So when they run a billboard, they'll take a picture of it. When they have a workshop, they'll take a picture of people standing up to be counted, or sign-in sheets. And so this is what they're starting to do, and this is kind of dated. Like I took the snapshot like 2 weeks ago. But this is Illinois Action for Children, right? And so they're uploading things like commitment cards, community impact sign-in sheets. And so this is just another way in our technical assistance layer that we're supporting the work that IDHS needs to be done, because they are a government agency. So there's like fiduciary responsibilities and auditing requirements and all this business. And so it's been a great partnership to work with them. So here's an example. Census, trusted messenger. It's really cool to see stuff like this. And Berwyn's jumping into the fray. And then you're going to see a whole bunch of billboards going up, hopefully in the next week. And so I think this is where I transition to my colleague. Here we go. All right. I don't know how long. Huh?
Thank you.
That's all right. All right. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Moira Zellner. I'm also faculty in the College of Urban Planning and Public Affairs, and in Urban Planning and Policy, and I'm also director of the Urban Data Visualization Lab. And so one of the things that we did as our part of the project was to create ways to visualize different kinds of information that would be helpful to support the census. And all of this is on our website, and I'll give you the URL at the end. But the first part of our work was trying to project where these hard-to-count populations would be in order to inform the efforts on outreach that would happen across the state, and to make sure that they were directed in the place that they were needed. And so what the Census Bureau has done in the past is that they developed this metric called hard to count, which is a score that has factors associated with lower counts of census participation. For the 2020 census, the Bureau developed an improved metric that is called the low response rate. And it's what you see on the left here. I know can you see? So this map on the left here shows the results of that low response score across Illinois. And while the previous HTC score weighs all the different factors that contribute to low response rates equally, this is an improved version from the Census Bureau because it gives different factors different weights according to how important they are. And that's great. The only thing is that they applied this model or this method equally to the entire United States. And so it doesn't really account for geographic differences among states, let alone within states. And we intuitively know that Chicago is different from downstate Illinois. And so the factors that may be contributing, as an example, there are many other internal differences. And so we wanted to account for those internal differences in whatever projection we had of where the response rates would be and why. What are the factors contributing to those response rates? So we developed our own metric, which is called the map account metric, that accounts for these geographic regions. And what that allowed us to do is to understand which areas are actually different from each other. And I'll show you in the next slides. But the idea is to more precisely project where the low response rates would be and why. And the main finding here that you see on the map is that on the right, the map is a little bit darker, right, than on the left. The left is the Census Bureau metric, the right is ours. And what we're suggesting here is that actually, from the Census Bureau, they might be overestimating the response rate. And it might be actually worse than we thought, and especially in the southern part of the state. So something already that can guide efforts in the future. So just to give an idea, essentially what we found is that all of these areas, so the city of Chicago, Chicago suburbs, urbanized areas outside of Chicago, urban clusters and rural areas, they're different from each other. That's what we found. And the factors then, there are some common factors that affect throughout, but there's different in priorities or importance. And also there are other factors that affect specific areas in particular. So for example, vacancy, people without high school degrees, unemployed people, all of these are very common throughout all of the areas as factors that contribute to low response rates. But I want you to focus, for example, on the percent foreign born. It doesn't really affect the city of Chicago, but it does affect the suburbs, other urban areas, and urban clusters. And what that might mean is that, well, in Chicago we actually have resources for foreign born people, so that doesn't really count as a factor contributing to low response rates, but those resources might not be available in all these geographic areas. And in rural areas, there might not be as many foreign born people. We also looked at this not only by geography, but also by socio-demographic characteristics like poverty, a majority African-American population, a majority Hispanic. And what we see is that for areas that are predominantly poor or African-American, again, like the same factors seem to affect. But for the Hispanic populations, however, which is the last block here, there are other factors. Oops, this doesn't want to go away, so I can show you. But there are other factors that contribute to low response rates. There we go. And so these are things, again, like to consider when we're thinking of strategies, outreach strategies. How do we reach out to these populations and make sure that they're counted, and how should we design them, our strategies differently based on these characteristics? So what we did also was create a visualization platform that would allow the outreach agencies, the regional intermediaries and subs and their users to go out there and have this information at hand and easily visible so that they can use it to inform their own strategies. And so for example, here you have all of these maps by geographic area, and then a user could click on one area, so for example, the urban clusters outside of Chicago, and they will be taken to a map where they can actually search for a particular area, I think this is Rockford, and just to take a look at like what is happening there, like what factors contribute to hard to count populations there. And so what we highlight is the factors that I showed you on the table earlier, like what are the factors contributing, so we've got to think about this as we design strategies. And these factors are also layers of this map that people can click on or off to see how they are distributed over the area. So the darker colors here show like the composites of like this map the count score that we developed, where the darker is like the worst. So okay, we've got to focus on those areas, but let's see what factors contribute to low response rates or projected low response rates in those areas, so they're able to see that. So they can look at each one of the layers. So here we've got the vacancy, the unemployment, born in foreign country, and no high school education. So they can look at how they're distributed, and so again, like, be very targeted in their efforts. Another thing that we added is not just like, what contributes to the response rates, but what resources may be there that we can tap into to enhance our outreach efforts. So what we did is we looked at databases for partners, potential partners, like say, libraries or NGOs or businesses, that might be able to support the the regional intermediaries or the sub-agencies. And so here you would see that where they're concentrated, and the color indicates the kind of agency that it would be. So for example, red is healthcare. Those might be major partners in outreach efforts. And so here they can actually see, okay, we need to ramp up some of our activity in this region. What are some partners we can count on there? And so that's something that we also included. Finally, we're
the assessment of the entire state effort to fund and support outreach is represented in this map, which is already changed, and it's very different now. But just to give you an idea, essentially what we have is the data that comes from the activity, the outreach activity itself, and how it's logged on, and we map it to see that actually the activities are happening where they need to happen. And so, thank goodness they're happening in the darker areas, otherwise it would be a problem, right? We don't want them in the lighter color areas. So this is a way that we can actually track, like, are things happening where they need to happen, and how much, and who's doing it. Right now, we're only seeing this, like, the colors represent the kind of activity, but we're actually switching to, so you know, guys, we're switching to, like, the RIs, or that are doing the activity, so that we know which entity is doing what. Where does all this data about activities come from? So what we did is we worked with some web developers who are actually graduates from UIC, and they're awesome. Their company is called Audentio. And we are working with them in very close collaboration to create these surveys that are online surveys that the regional intermediaries, the subs, and the users of these organizations can go to the field and log in all the activity that they're doing. And so there are different kinds of activities that IDHS is interested in, like direct engagement, community education events, community media events, training of trusted messengers, questionnaire assistance, and so on. And so they can click on, as a user, they can log in, they're paired with their correct organization, and then they can start logging in all the activity that they do. What this also allows is for different activities, or different organizations, sorry, to put their own goals, and they do have, because they have to state what their goals are to IDHS, and this is what we are attempting to do it. And they can post those goals, and then see how are we doing with respect to those goals. Now in this particular example, they might be like extreme overachievers, because they are 5,000, over 5,000, over 5,000% over their stated goal, or it might just be like an error in what they're reporting. But either way, it's good, because on one hand, if they are overachievers, we want to congratulate them. If they're not and it's an error, we want to be able to check on that and just make sure that they put the right thing in there. But it allows, again, like to put it in goals and incentives and be able to track that. The other thing that this platform allows us to do is as the RIs administer subs, as IDHS administers and supervises all the RIs, which is an incredibly complex task. One of the things that the platform does is that it allows for the aggregation and kind of like general overview of what's happening in the entire state that is funded by these funds. So it does facilitate gathering information so that IDHS can see progress and kind of like flag some things that might be problematic and to follow up with if some RIs are having difficulty, if some subs are having difficulty. And it's a fairly simple experience, although of course, once people are learning a new tool, it's, at the beginning it's a little bit painful, and so there's a lot of, support and tech support that we're involved in, but it's becoming, definitely it's like the adoption has increased greatly. But it's a fairly simple experience then, and so the key organizations and outreach workers are together, and we can look at all of the experience together, and so we're sure that we maximize efforts across the board. So there's some of the features is that there's easy submission for those in the field. This works on a mobile phone, on a tablet, on laptop. There's the ability for the LRIs to input and track data. There's a quick turnaround for submitting and evaluating data. You can run reports, create summaries, gather the required IDHS data so the RIs can submit their reports every month. And again, like share goals and track milestones and progress. So for now, as of this morning, so because Oswaldo and Marishonta don't know this, we have 23 regional intermediaries, actually it's 23 contracts, which actually are 25. But so there are a few that we're still targeting to try to bring them on board, but 321 subs and 3,000 activity reports already logged in. And again, like this platform allows to quickly look at the progress every day. And so we integrate all of this into the mapping tool. So remember that map that I showed you with activities, this is like for the overall state. Again, this is outdated already. We've got to update it with the new information. And also with just this different visualization by RI. But the idea is that now what we're working on is just making sure that everyone is on board and familiarized with this new tool, that they use it for reporting, that we can look at the resources and how they're being spent and where they are, and just use it for mapping, continue mapping and visualizing these activities. And then once we get the census data, when we get the census data on response rates, we can actually track where we need more efforts of coverage. But also, in addition to that, so we can see like, okay, this, we might need more outreach in certain areas because we are not getting, as much response rates or responses from particular areas, and so we can look into it. But ultimately, really what we're doing is a really important data collection effort where we can then use to assess how these efforts translate into impacts. Mm-hmm. There are not many studies out there on this. There's only one that we found, and we did look because we wanted to inform outreach efforts and what kinds of strategies would be more impactful for particular kinds of factors that are an obstacle to response, participating in the census. And we didn't find that many. This would be like only the second that we know of, and really with full data, because even that didn't really have the ability, like in terms of the kind of quantity of data, to match effort to impact. So this would really be a first effort to be able to do that. So if you want to know more, just explore our website. That's map.count.org or map.count.uic.edu. Either one, you get to the same place. And I think that is it. You are welcome to reach out to us and contact us if you have any questions, if you're curious, if or if you have feedback and ideas, just let us know. We'll be happy to hear it.
Cool. Yay. Oh, okay. Moira, you stay up there and grab a seat, and then I'm going to follow you guys since you have to sit back there.
Yeah.
So you go.
You're the second end of my.
Sure. Okay. All right.
I feel so official.
Okay. There you go. Of course, I brought my phone.
I would have worn my nice heels.
I know this is the Oprah part.
Wonderful talks, incredibly informative, and
Okay.
you're doing such important work. So I have 3 questions, one of which is really, I think, pretty easy. So please, it's a relatively small audience, but this is like the census, it's your opportunity to be heard.
Yeah.
So please fill out your cards and Kelsey's picking them up. But here's the easy question. Can you repeat where faculty can find a link for a census presentation you can show in class?
Sure. So if you Google...
Do you want to show it on the...
We can just, if you just back up to the Voorhees slide. You have to go all the way to the beginning. Yeah, even more, sorry. It's there, sorry. Yeah, that's all right.
It's like,
Yeah, let me...
I thought it was 6.
So you can find it off of this site, but wait, let me see if I can show you guys. All right, so go to Voorhees UIC Census 2020, just Google the hell out of that, and then you'll get to, look under resources and University of Illinois, and that's where you'll find this box, the link to the box that has all the lecture notes.
How can communities use the 987 text option as a tool for advocacy and political engagement beyond what the census questions ask? I was thinking a similar thing along the lines that, we know how to reach so many people now, and there's so many ways. We also have an election coming up. Is that something one can do? Is that ethical? Is it
Well, we're trying to use the numbers for the information for what we've told people, right? So we're saying it's for the census. So part of me is like, I don't want to say it's for the census, and I'm like, hey, come out and buy this, and hey, come vote, right? Also, I know there's some, we feel about linking this information with voting, right? Because we don't want other communities, specifically immigrant communities, to feel like that they're the same requirements to be able to vote and respond to the census, right? Because they're not. You can respond to the census just because you live here. We know voting has different requirements. So we were trying to not mix the two, even though we know those two powerful civic engagement activities. Do you want to?
I was going to also, just as context, for those of you who don't know how enormous IDHS, so the Illinois Department of Human Services, so, you know, I think 1 in 3 Illinoisans, I don't know what we're called, people who live in Illinois have some contact with IDHS.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you have a mom who's in a senior home, members of your community that need access to SNAP or LIHEAP or
Medicaid.
Medicaid, right? It's so enormous, and the ability for the communities to trust that, you know, their information and what they're asking for help around is protected and private, I think is also something that we're just kind of, you know, we're gonna have to work it out. All this work is new, right? The census office, like, Shanta still doesn't have a laptop. So I'm just saying, like, this is very new. So I think that it's a good question for us to grapple with.
About,
And to add to that, like one of the things, can people hear me?
yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we're trying to do with this is really create the groundwork, like going into the future for future efforts. And of course, you know, all of this is going to be probably like old technology in 10 years.
Yeah.
But still, I think that we are really shifting a lot from previous census efforts as we move forward and really creating a good platform to go further in the future.
Yeah.
Thank you. What assurances do immigrant communities have, being undocumented, that their information won't be used against them?
Maybe I can take that one. I think that, I mean, so that's a very complicated question to answer, just because I feel like it doesn't matter what I say, there's still going to be a lot of like, well, this, well, that, you know what, we live in a Trump era, right? One of the things that I do tell people as I go out and do this, and as I'm speaking to people, is that one, the citizenship question is not in the census anymore, right? Well, it was never in the census, but it never made it to the census. And then the other piece of the information that I try to tell people is that, you know how everyone's going to receive a mailing? Well, they're going to receive a mailing because you already shared your information with the U.S. Postal Office. So one of the things that I tell people is that my name is Osvaldo Alvarez, right? If they're going to try to decipher between one Osvaldo Alvarez with papers and one Osvaldo Alvarez without papers, they could try to decipher that right now. So one of the things that I try to tell people is that what the census does, what you do once you fill out the census, you're twisting government's arm to represent you and to invest in you. It is 7 more questions. The first 2, they have them. So that is one of the things that I try to tell people. I try to build them through that power, if you will. And this is one of the things that I try to, I mean, and this is one of the reasons why I want to share this with you, because different messages resonate with different individuals, right? But I have seen actually that the one of power, of building power, actually is resonating a whole lot with people.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean,
And there's a penalty with the U.S. Census Bureau workers if they share their information, right? And I don't think they want to pay $200,000 and go to prison for however many years. I don't think it's worth it just to be like, here's this person, right?
Right, like the Census Bureau is federally, like, I mean, there's a law, they can't share data, but you know, I was going to mention, like in 2010, I worked on the 2010 census, I'm old. That fear really did only exist in certain communities, so Muslim American and, you know, other communities, and that point about building power is really critical, because the money that comes back from our tax dollars goes to fund community-based organizations that provide in-language services, that provide access to, you know, trainings on citizenship and all these other things, and also provide the social infrastructure for when ICE starts raiding. They're the first ones on the front lines, defending and protecting communities. So, I mean, you know, it's not like a one-for-one, like, you know, if I don't do it, then they'll still always be around. It's like, it's an ecology. Like, we need people to show up.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Are the plans to accelerate door knocking for college campuses, are there plans, I'm sorry, to accelerate door knocking for college campuses given the end of the semesters?
So colleges, the dorms and college living facilities are counted in the group quarters, and so the U.S. Census Bureau will reach out to the school administrator to do that count. So we won't necessarily need to do door knocking on dorms, but for for students that may live off campus, our organizations should be door knocking soon. We gave a grant to UIC to reach some young and mobile, and we have plans to work with like community colleges to reach other students, non-traditional students, and so we need to get the word out at universities, but I don't think that there needs to be a big door knocking on campus because that count is already underway. They started reaching out in February to correlate with the semester to get students before they go home or study abroad for the summer.
Yeah, if you download that UIC census presentation, so one of the slides is that 85% of UIC students commute. That was the whole logic behind our Census Ambassadors program, is that we knew that if all we had to do is just get in front of eyeballs in our classrooms, share why it's important. And what we're asking our students, like the faculty that have, CUPA faculty and some LAS and political science and others, they have shown this slide deck. And all we're asking is for those students to just go back home and talk with their families, their caregivers, to share this information and just help support fill out the census. We don't need, that's step one. Everything else, like door knocking and stuff like that, if you want to get involved, it's the Census Ambassadors project is how we're trying to funnel more active students into a sort of more intensive. The other place you can go, actually, and I didn't put it on here because lots of details, is the Office of Leadership and Student Engagement. Okay, so if you go through there's a volunteer portal, and just look up Census Ambassadors, and you'll get immediately plugged in to many of these subs who are on campus right now looking for students who may be in your neighborhoods and communities, but you got to sign up first and just reach out so that we know you want to actually help. But that's the second level of intensity. And the third is Census Ambassadors, where you're spending 10 hours a week actually giving presentations. So, yeah.
How does Illinois census process compare with what other states are doing?
Much better.
Well, we have the biggest appropriation for each person for census outreach and education, so we are better in that area, right? We have more money, which means we can do more and can put a more aggressive touch on the hard to count populations. We got the hub and spoke model from California, and that seems to be working, where you have the coalition leader and they give grants to a smaller community-based organization, and they can give grants to another community-based organization. So the hub and the spoke and another spoke, because we know that trusted messengers are what will get the word out. And so I think that is where we are kind of similar. Another area where we're better is that there's some states that are like, we are not putting forth any census investments, right? Like Texas.
Yeah.
So then we're way better than them, right? And so I think that that's how
and
we're.
then in terms of the visualization too, when we started working on this, we looked at other examples, and in terms of the functionalities of the website for reporting, and then the visualization and our own projection on where the hard-to-count populations might be and what populations those are, that's definitely very, very different and much more precise than what other states are doing.
Yeah, and just to add, our model is really centered on the power that the community-based nonprofits bring, that they are the trusted messenger. You'll see more of them being the ones who have the Erie House T-shirt with the U.S. Census versus having an Illinois Census T-shirt, because we really believe in this bottom-up approach. However, we also do believe in building the plane, building the infrastructure, building the mapping system, right? So I think that we are truly trying to build it on both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, and we have, with the platform, we are reaching out to that ground level activity and giving them the tools to then do their work more effectively.
Yeah.
Is there any fear of interference in the census, just given the world we're living in?
Yeah, of course.
That's already happened.
Yeah.
It's already happened.
Oh, yeah. The whole citizenship question.
I guess I meant sort of more sub rosa type of interference.
Like interference, like how, I mean,
Well, with the online.
Oh.
The hacking stuff?
Hacking.
oh,
No, I mean, we have actually discussed it, and so I'm not gonna reveal, but I'm gonna give you, we have protections in place, but I, won't say more because
right.
So it's like, no, but definitely that's always an issue.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's like, so we have protections in place, and then there isn't really like incredibly sensitive information there that would be like incredibly dangerous to to specific people. Like if there are no identifiers or things like that that would make people vulnerable if it were hacked, but still we do have protections in place. So essentially what happens is that each organization and user within the organization and all of the subs, they all have to register. There's a whole process of vetting all of the information. So there are a lot of safeguards put in place. You have to have an account to be able to do that. You can't just, all you can see publicly is the maps, what's coming out of the process and what is informing the process, but not the data from the activities. That is all, password secure information and process.
And if I may add one thing that so as you can see, I like to remind people of some stuff, right? So one of the things that I like to remind people, especially now that right here that I'm in a college setting, is that if you are requesting a Pell Grant, you are going into FAFSA.gov, right? So there, you are already sharing a whole bunch of information. One of the things that I tell people is that a lot of the information, I mean, and to your point, Moira, the census is 9 questions, right? And there's not a social security question, it's not a, so these are just things that I try to remind people, right? That, that there of course, there's always a threat, but there has been for years now, all of the mechanisms to try to make sure that everything that is online is as safe as it can be.
Perhaps what was meant was more the threat of undercounting, even if the counting is there. That political purposes, not for purposes of individuals.
So that would be like a census.
A U.S. Census
Yeah,
Bureau.
well, I mean, I've heard, okay, so you all remember Obamacare? And, or maybe not, some of the older ones, okay? But, so when that platform rolled out, it immediately crashed because of just, they underestimated that, so that, I mean, maybe those were bots, I don't know, but I mean, they just had underestimated and right now the news from the census and then those who are monitoring census testing is that they started late, they don't have enough money, what is the likelihood of this platform potentially crashing? So that's why we're also emphasizing, make sure, there's a phone option, okay, that's pretty fast, and then as well as the mail-in, right? Like just multiple ways, just in case if you can't log in, you still have a backup plan. So things like that.
Okay. I have 2 more questions up here, so if anyone has another question, please give to us. This one says it's for Moira. What data response rates were used for the data mapping? For example, was it the 2010 census, and how was it built?
Yeah, so essentially what we used was, we looked at and we created a methodology with the 2010 data, but then we used more recent data from, so that was census data, but then we used more recent data from the American Community Survey. And so that's what we used to project going forward because there have been a lot of recent demographic changes, right? So that's what we used looking forward. And so what we did is, again, we went through several iterations of looking at, different statistical approaches to see relationships between factors, and every time we meet, I was like, well, but what about, and I would, the people working with me who were listed there, they were all happy to do it in the end, but it was like, no question. But geography did matter, and intuitively it did matter, and that was something that really was novel and was brought as part of one of the iterations and discussions. And so we did it in parts. We did it as a progression, as an iterative process, and I remember sharing it with Kathleen and Janet, and then I asked, what other demographic factors should we do, kind of like a matrix of geography with demography, and my technicians were just starting to pull their hair out. But, Kathleen said, no, but I think that we need to look, I said, what are the main demographic aspects? And so she shared,
Yeah.
Hispanic, African American,
Right.
and poverty.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did, and we tried, and we did see that there were differences. So we were really looking at it and slicing
Yeah.
the information in different ways to get to this comprehensive model. The model that you see then is a combination, so the map shows a combination of the geographic models, but then also having as these other layers of information, the socio-demographic ones.
Yeah.
So it's like a really multi-method kind of approach, and the process itself was an iterative one.
Yeah. No, and it was actually a really, I mean, that it was one of the more fun experiences because, I mean, you know, so I, having worked on the census and also working in the Asian American communities, like, so there was like sort of built-in just knowledge of, there's a Lao American community out in Elgin, and I know what's going on with them, but they're, you know, they might not be missed if we are only looking in Chicago metropolitan statistics. There's been a lot of growth in Latino populations in the collar counties
Yes.
because of migrant workers and all this who are nowhere on the radar. So informing some of that and then coming up with a model that, you know, I mean, what's gratifying is to see the model actually reflecting the things that we know are going on the ground. So it's kind of cool to see that. That's cool.
Thank you. Okay, and last question I have, again, another, I think, a simple one. Do you need to receive the print mailing in order to respond online?
No.
Is there a login ID or something in the printed letter?
So when you get the invitation, if you get it, there is a code, but you don't need that to respond. So you can just go in and respond without it.
It'll give you the 9-digit zip code
So.
if you want it.
Yeah.
With or without it, March 12th, have at it, get counted,
That's right.
9 days.
Anything else you'd like to say in closing?
If you all know of any organizations or groups that are having census events or need to, and you want us, Oswaldo and I, to come speak, let us know. We travel the state, like Kathleen says. We'll be more than willing. If you need talking points, we can help you too if you want to do the talking. But just get counted, spread the word, make sure you're counted. Oswaldo mentioned that the census is in the Constitution, and I always like to remind people, and I say this, and I know Black History Month ended, but that's fine. I am a Black woman unapologetically, right? And so when that Constitution was written, people that look like me and Oswaldo and maybe all of us were not considered a full person. We were counted as 3/5. So if nothing else, everybody needs to be counted and make the government see us and give our state the resources that we need and that we deserve so that we don't lose out for the next 10 years. Because we only got one shot. We don't get to get a redo when we see the results and say, it was too low, let's try again, right?
Right,
We don't
yeah.
get it's just a one time.
That's a great way to end.
Well said.
Great way to end. Thank you. Please join me in thanking our speakers.
I like that. Right on.